In aviation, some aircraft become legends for their reliability, their beauty, or the impact that they had on aviation history itself. And then there's the DC-10, an aircraft remembered for all the right reasons, and then all the wrong ones. A jet that promised airlines a revolution in long-haul travel, and then became the centre of one of the most dramatic controversies the industry has ever seen. And today we're going to break down the DC-10 in a way that few videos ever do. We're going to look into why it was created, what McDonnell Douglas tried to build, the engineering decisions that shaped it, the design flaws that nearly destroyed its reputation, the accidents which changed aviation forever, why some pilots feared it and why others absolutely loved it, and why, in the end of all of this, it actually became a cargo legend. This isn't just a story of an aircraft, this is a story of an icon. If you do enjoy the video, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe, as I do make and research these videos by myself. If you do appreciate it, let me know in the comment section. Let's jump in now to look at the DC-10. To start this story, we need to go back to the 1960s, which was a turning point for aviation. Boeing was just months away from launching their 747, the first true jumbo jet. Lockheed was developing their iconic L-1011 TriStar, a technologically advanced widebody that promised serious efficiency and a futuristic avionics layout. Suddenly, the world's largest airlines wanted bigger aircraft with wider cabins and huge passenger volumes. McDonnell Douglas could see the future, and they were nowhere in it. Their bestseller at this time was the DC-8, a perfectly fine long-haul jet, but one that was quickly becoming outdated. If McDonnell Douglas did not release a widebody soon, they had the potential of losing some of their biggest customers, and the company needed a new aircraft, and they needed it fast. And that urgency lies at the root of the DC-10's entire story, because it wasn't like the L-1011 TriStar or the 747. The DC-10 was not born from innovation. You could argue it was born from desperation and market pressures. McDonnell Douglas did not set out to build the most safe, the most advanced, or most forward-thinking widebody at the time. Their goal was something much more simple: build something good enough and deliver it fast. The DC-10 was designed as a tri-jet. It was a plane with 3 engines, one on each wing and a third one built into the tail. Why 3 engines? Well, for those that don't know, it's because at the time regulations made oceanic flights difficult for twin-engine aircraft. Oftentimes there were regulations where multiple engines above the number of 2 were needed, and essentially 3-engine jets filled this gap perfectly. They were more fuel efficient than 4 engines, but also had a lot more reliability than 2 engines. They were certainly the perfect mix. And please pay attention to that fact about efficiency of trijets, because the DC-10's configuration of 3 engines made a lot of sense on paper. It was going to require less fuel than a 747, it was going to carry more passengers than a DC-8, and it compared directly with the L-1011 TriStar. But here's where the engineering differences started to matter, because Lockheed designed the L-1011 with Rolls-Royce engines, using incredibly complex tail-mounted S-ducts which offered smooth airflow and high reliability and stability. Now McDonnell Douglas, on the other hand, chose a different approach. They were going to use an external tail engine mount, mounted high on the vertical stabilizer. This meant that the DC-10 was cheaper to build, easier to maintain, and lighter. But it also meant that the aircraft had a higher centre of gravity and less aerodynamic forgivingness. The DC-10 was efficient, but it had sharp edges, and its design wasn't inherently unsafe, but it did require engineering precision and flawless execution in every compartment, and one compartment in particular was about to become infamous. Now this brings us on to the design oversight with the DC-10, which arguably never should have happened, as this is where the story shifts from a competitive aircraft to an engineering cautionary tale. The lower cargo door on the DC-10 was designed to open outward, not inwards like on most commercial aircraft. Most of this time used plug type doors. They pressurized against the fuselage when the plane was in the air. The benefit of this was that they could not open in flight. Physics simply prevented it. But outwards opening doors Not so much. They did save space and allow more room for cargo, and easier loading. But there was a fatal issue with this, as we are about to see. Now, simply put, McDonnell Douglas chose this design because airlines wanted it. After all, if the doors locked, then there wouldn't be any extra threat or potential for things to go wrong, right? Well, there was one major issue with this, because for things to not turn out tragically, the door would have to be locked flawlessly every time. The locking system required a series of metal latches, a torque shaft, an electronic actuator, and a small inspection window to confirm proper alignment, and this had to be perfect on every flight. However, there was a major issue, as this design allowed a ground crew worker to force the handle closed even when the latches were not fully engaged. This flaw was discovered early. A near-catastrophic incident happened on an American Airlines test flight in 1970. A second, also nearly identical failure occurred on a Turkish Airlines flight in 1972. The aircraft depressurized, the cargo door collapsed, and control cables were severed. The only reason that the plane did not crash was luck and quick thinking on behalf of the pilots. McDonnell Douglas was warned this would cause a fatal accident. They knew that the locking mechanism needed a redesign, and they didn't do it. And in 1974, that flaw would reappear with devastating consequences. On March 3rd, 1974, Flight 981 departed from Paris. Shortly after takeoff, the cargo door blew off. The main cabin suffered an explosive decompression, the floor collapsed, control cables snapped instantly. The DC-10 was simply uncontrollable and all 346 people on board died. At the time, this was the worst aviation accident in history. Now, what made it worse was that investigators discovered that the door mechanism has not been fixed. Warnings had been ignored, and the aircraft had a known design vulnerability, and McDonnell Douglas had implemented only partial changes to this time. This destroyed the DC-10's reputation practically overnight. Airlines seriously began to question this aircraft. Passengers tried to do everything they could to avoid it, and the media labelled it to be unsafe. And this was a moment the DC-10 could have died forever, but strangely it didn't. And to understand why, we need to look deeper into the aircraft itself, because the DC-10's problem was never the entire aeroplane. It was a series of specific design failures, not a fundamentally bad design. That distinction is absolutely critical to look into the future of the DC-10 from this point. Now, if the cargo door defined the early 1970s for the DC-10, then the engine mount issue defined the late years of the 1970s. American Airlines Flight 191 departing from Chicago in 1979 suffered a catastrophic engine separation. The number one engine tore away from the wing during takeoff, hydraulic lines were severed, the left wing lost its lift, and the aircraft rolled, stalled, and ultimately crashed. It remains, again, the deadliest incident in US aviation history. But here's the part that most people don't realise. The DC-10 itself was not responsible for this failure entirely, as American Airlines had been using unofficial maintenance procedures and shortcuts that stressed the engine pylons past where they should have been. The FAA knew, McDonnell Douglas knew, and airlines knew, but the damage yet again was done, as the public heard only one thing: a DC-10 crashes again and hundreds are dead. The aircraft was grounded yet again. The media frenzy this time was even more insane, and passengers were terrified to fly on it. And yet, engineers and pilots who understood the aircraft knew its truth. The DC-10 was not a bad plane. It just suffered from bad decisions, bad maintenance, bad corporate pressure, bad communication, bad oversight, and ultimately bad timing. Even though the aircraft was not inherently unsafe, a lot of pilots had mixed feelings towards the jets. Some absolutely loved it, but some found it had characteristics making it more undesirable to fly and less forgiving than other jets. The first issue with it was a high centre of gravity from its tall engines. The DC-10 could feel top-heavy. High altitude turbulence felt a lot more violent, and pitch control required absolute finesse, especially during the climb and descent phase of flights. Then there was the hydraulic system layout. The DC-10 had 3 hydraulic systems, normally very safe, but this configuration was vulnerable to specific scenarios, and United Flight 232 showed this. It also had very sensitive landing behaviour, as the DC-10 could float, pitch up, or slam depending on speed. Many pilots said it was comfortable in cruise, but felt absolutely demanding near the runway. It also had a high reliance on perfect maintenance. Realistically, the aircraft could handle almost anything, apart from poor maintenance, as poor procedures and rushed efforts and cost cutting led to some of the worst issues with the DC-10 over the course of its life. But the most interesting part is that despite all of these issues, despite all of the controversies and crashes, many pilots loved flying it, and their reasons matter a lot when talking about the DC-10 story. As for all its flaws, the DC-10 had a lot of qualities that pilots adored. With its 3 engines, it had massive thrust. Pilots described the takeoff as unstoppable, even with its high weights. It felt solid and stable at cruise, and many pilots described it as smooth, quiet, and majestic. The cockpit also had a clean, logical workflow, as despite being analog, the DC-10 was actually intuitive. Pilots training from older jets found it very easy to learn. It was also excellent on fuel for this era, and that made airlines a lot more money, and pilots liked that it kept them employed. It had a personality too, and this is a massively overlooked trait, as even though some pilots feared its quirks, the DC-10 had an admitted charm. It wasn't the perfect aircraft, but it certainly was a meaningful one, and this was something that many pilots reflected in their testimonies when speaking about this aircraft. Now we need to talk United Flight 232, as this was a flight that in 1989 suffered a catastrophic tail engine explosion. The aircraft had no flight controls, but miraculously the pilots were able to steer it using nothing but throttle adjustments from the remaining 2 engines. Unfortunately, this incident resulted in a crash landing that killed 111 people. However, 185 actually survived. This survival changed the narratives. Engineers realized that the DC-10 was actually incredibly strong. Its systems could withstand unimaginable damage, and crew resource management on the aircraft was actually world class. United 232 proved that even in the worst case scenarios, the DC-10 structure saves lives. And it actually for once showed some of the good elements that the DC-10 could have rather than all of the failures of its past. This is where the story takes an even more interesting twist, as the DC-10 found a second life in cargo. After all of the controversies, a lot of passengers really began not to trust the DC-10, but this is where cargo companies absolutely began to love it. Most notably, we're talking about FedEx and UPS, which discovered the aircraft was tough, powerful, long range, cheap to operate, perfect for heavy freight, and easy to convert. And this is where the DC-10 enters a new era. An era as a reliable workhorse. The perfect jet for long nights, rough conditions and heavy loads. Many DC-10s flew well into the 2010s, long after anybody expected they would be. And the most interesting part, many of them are still flying today. Despite all of its flaws, the DC-10 set the stage for a new interesting jet to come. If you watch a video that we made on the MD-11 just the other week, you'll know about this. But yes, the DC-10 certainly did set the stage for the MD-11's creation. McDonnell Douglas learnt from the DC-10's mistakes. They simply needed stronger systems, a redesigned cockpit, improved wings and better avionics, and this is where they attempted to build the successor, the MD-11. But ironically, fixing many old issues created a lot more new ones. The MD-11 had unforgiving landing behaviour, pitch sensitivity, it had a tendency to float, complex automation, and a number of problems of its own. If you're interested, feel free to check out my MD-11 video. But the DC-10 and its legacy still lives on in 2025, for better or for worse. A jet which everybody has an opinion on, and one which has certainly shaped the history of aviation. So in conclusion, the DC-10 story is complicated. It was innovative, but it was flawed. It was underrated, but it was also over-criticized. It was ahead of its time, but it was a victim of corporate pressure. It was a hero in the cargo world, yet a villain in the public's eye. The DC-10 represents something rare in aviation, an aircraft defined not by what it was designed to be, but defined by its decisions and mistakes and the humans behind it. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't always safe, but it was important and it changed aviation forever. If anything, the DC-10 reminds us that engineering isn't about perfection, but it is about learning, adopting, and improving. And sometimes the planes with the most tragic and forgotten, or even confused stories, are the ones that we learn the most from. So guys, that's the story of the DC-10. Do let me know what you think to this video. If you enjoyed it, feel free to leave a like, feel free to subscribe. Tell me if you learned something about the DC-10 here. But yes, I wanted to share something about the DC-10 with you tonight. So again, if you did enjoy, let me know, and feel free to subscribe. Also feel free to watch a video on the MD-11 that I produced just the other week. Thank you so much for your time, and goodbye for now.